young kid. I mean, he came out at Bled in 79, I think, and he was kind of open about the blue pills. So you could kind of think, well, they're better than us, kind of in that sense. But there was always the drug thing, and I kind of normalised being beaten by those two, as opposed to being aspirational. Like, all right, how do we beat them? The night before, Mike Spracklen had kind of said, right, this is your race plan. What you're going to do is fast start, lead the Americans, you're going to get to 250, and then you're going to really put your foot down. And then you're just going to edge out, and then you're going to get to 500 and move out. So we're going to be in the lead by 1,000, and then we're going to move away. We start off and we go through 250, and then we have a kind of minute call coming up to 500, and the Americans are moving away. They're going out to half a length. Well, this isn't the race plan. I said to Adrian, I'm making the calls now. So then basically we were edging back on the Americans. I think it made great telly. We got through and then past the line, absolutely nothing. Felt nothing. And then the guy I'd rode with in the pair, John Beattie, he was shouting, Martin, Martin. And that call just woke me up and said, oh, fucking hell, we've won.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Last Stroke Counts. We've got a fantastic episode planned out today. We have Martin Cross out in the Leander Library. I think the undisputed voice of rowing and someone who makes watching the international racing just so exciting. Martin, it's with great pleasure that we can welcome you to the show today.
So great to be here, Peter and Tom. Thank you.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming. Took us a while to set it up. So happy we got it done. From my sort of point of view, I think we speak a lot about rowing not being a sport but being a lifestyle. I think you sort of encapsulated that by spending your whole life involved in it. There's so many different aspects to us, obviously, from rowing and commentating, coaching, all those sorts of things. I think so much to get into. I'm really, really excited to do it.
And I'd like to point out it's our second Olympic champion that we've got on the show.
Wow.
Yeah. The first of which, Tim, who you were involved with helping.
There was, I think, a chapter in the book that I wrote, The Sorcerer and His Apprentice, which was the name that Tim and I used to go by back in the day.
I found it fascinating. Everyone says Tim is, the most technically proficient, or one of the most technically proficient rowers that's ever sort of picked up an oar. I was so fascinated to find out how he started. I'm really interested in the fact that basically it was I didn't have a coach. I just had to work it out myself from the start. I thought that was sort of a fascinating thing. It wasn't necessarily, sometimes that's sort of that outside the box thinking. And I think sometimes in rowing we can really get caught up with well, this is what I do because my coach taught me that and he taught me that, and things get sort of quite stuck in their ways. Yeah,
in fact, when I was in 89, I was in a quad that was going nowhere, and I was going to go back into rowing in 90. And David Tanner was the sort of performance director, and there was a thing around who's going to be your pairs partner, and I was like, early on, straight away, I said I want to row with Tim.
Nice.
And basically that's kind of what happened. So Tim and me were an item for 90, 91 and 92. Which was so fortunate for me that I got to row with such a great technician.
But as a combination, you guys got a little bit unlucky with the fact that obviously Pinton and Redgrave were doing their first Olympics in 92 in Barcelona, and then obviously you had the Searle brothers in the pair as well. And then what Tim mentioned that you guys really went far off with percentages and stuff, but you unfortunately can't send three pairs to the Olympics.
No, to be fair, I think the Searles were razor focused, going to beat Pinton and Redgrave in the trials. And Pinton and Redgrave, obviously a great pair. We were third in that trials race behind the Searles and Pinton and Redgrave, and I think they wanted it more than us. I think if we'd have been really laser focused on how we're going to win and had a more effective psychological attitude, then something different might have happened. But then, to be fair, that wasn't how we rode. We were very laissez-faire, very cool. Let's not put too much of an appearance of trying hard. And
that's Tim all over. Yeah. Oh, awesome! Just to roll it back a little bit, then I love to find out how did you find rowing in the first place?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it had a lot to do with my dad. So context, my dad was head of sport at school I went to, which was Cardinal Vaughan in Kensington, and I couldn't work out why I was no good at sport, really, like football. I think because Dad, I didn't play with kids in the street. Dad didn't really help me out at all. I think he was always at games and whatever. So I was no good at football. Things, the odd running, I was no good at that. We didn't really play cricket. So, and I wasn't a great catcher of the ball. So Dad had introduced a few sports into the Vaughan through the rowing centre at Barn Elms. So he kind of went to learn how to be a coach. Mm-hmm. So in year 9 or third year in some schools, he kind of said, look, rowing could be your sport, Martin. And it was like, so, and he'd taken me to a regatta. I think the first regatta I went to was to watch one of his crews at Peterborough Regatta.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so they weren't particularly good, and Dad wasn't a great coach, to be quite honest, but, he didn't need to be because he had some support at Barn Elms. So we kind of, I got in there to Barn Elms once a week, and I was rubbish, really, in terms of, I think other people adapted, other kids in my year group adapted to it quicker. And I guess it would have stayed that way, but for the fact that my dad employed a guy called Jim Clark, who was going to be an Olympic silver medalist in Montreal in 76. He was an Olympian in Munich in 1972. And so I had this guy who was an international rower come in to teach me, and he was going to take on the rowing. And it was more than just him being there, because I don't know whether it was because my dad was his boss or whatever, but Jim used to talk to me about races, like at the weekend. So things like, they'd race then in Ostend, I think, was a regatta, and, they were racing the Russians or the Czechs, and he'd sort of do the actions of where they were in the race and when they had a burn or something. And so I was very versed from the age of being 14, 15 in international rowing and the personalities. And so that was a world which I loved, because I was a bit dorky and geeky, and Jim was talking to me about these things which seemed quite grown up and exciting. And then he suggested that I join a club, because he basically said, you don't row enough at school at the moment. So he suggested go down to tradesmen, and it was George Hooper then, who not alive now, but he introduced me to rowing in a tub for, and so I had more outings at tradesmen, and so I kind of then rose through the ranks at school, and it ended up me and a guy called Derek Bond, who oddly enough I'm seeing him tonight. And we were a J16 pair. We won the nationals, which was like amazing. And I think we tried next year for juniors, got beaten by Pangbourne. And then Derek was a 1-year junior. So I couldn't row with him in my last year of juniors. Mm-hmm. And it so happened that Ealing Grammar School had a 4 that had, I think, got a silver medal in the juniors, and 3 of them were going to carry on the next year.
They were just missing one.
They were missing one. So basically, the thing was, I turned up and they thought they were going to get Derek, because Derek was the stroke man, and they got me. So I think there was a bit of disappointment, but I then got into that crew, which really put me on a trajectory, because 3 of us went on to the Moscow Olympics. So it was a kind of, staged progress through, but always with that thing of, my dad started me off, but Jim Clark was the hero figure that kind of introduced me to this wonderful world of international rowing.
I like that. Yeah. People ask me the question, are you going to get your kids to row? And I think it would be nice if they did or they didn't, but I think what I do is sort of what your dad is, just try and introduce them to as many sports as you can and find the one they love. It's not about trying to make them love the one you love, which was kind of what I did, same as you, try football, crap, tennis, rubbish, couldn't do anything, and played rugby for a little bit, but I was such a small, skinny kid. So yeah, you find that one you love, and it's that interesting, like you said, for you to sort of almost had that kind of introduction of like tactics and international racing and kind of have that knowledge before you got into it, but that was kind of what gave you the spark.
Yeah, and I kind of think it wasn't arrogance, but it was just a belief, because you kind of knew all that stuff that Jim said, you'd be better at it relative to other people you were rowing against, which gave you a level of self-confidence, rowing as a J16 or 17. Yeah. Certainly. So I think that really gave me a good grounding to start off with.
And then that Ealing 4 you got into, that was the 4 that David Tanner was he coaching it at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we thought David was like the world's best coach. I mean, he wasn't. But he was incredibly focused. He learned a lot from different people. He used to go and talk to people like, Bob Janasek, who was the GB men's coach at the time, Tor Nielsen, God rest his soul, the great Norwegian coach, Penny Shooter, who was then pretty active. So he learned from a lot of people, and he was extremely well organised. So, and he shielded us, later, he shielded us from a lot of political crap that was going on, and looked out for our interests. So, I think that junior year, it was an Ealing Cardinal Vaughan composite, although it was kind of always seen, I guess rightly, as the Ealing 4. And we had a sensational, there's that word again, season. We beat a lot of Senior A, as it was then, or even elite crews in the UK, which I think a top junior crew needs to do. We won the Visitors' Cup at Henley, which was like Henley win, what was I, 17, I think, when I won Henley first time. And Visitors' Cup then was for universities, and schools used to enter, but not really get anywhere. So, and then we went to Montreal for the World Juniors, which was a trip. That was where the Olympic course was going to be the next year. And we got a silver medal. We beat last year the silver medalists, I think, for the year before, the West Germans. The East beat us by just about a length. Not sure we were going to get onto them, but it was good enough for us to say, right, what do we want to do? Like, do we want to carry this thing on? And 3 of us were pretty keen to. One, Robin, God rest his soul again, he's not with us. He decided he didn't want to take rowing further, but 3 of us did, and David was up for it, which was, I guess, the thing. He was, single man. He didn't have family commitments, so he could do his head of history and coach us as well. So, that then provided a path for us.
So when you left school, obviously you can kind of do school and rowing, but then you kind of go out into the wide world. There's no funding, there's no really organisation in terms of rowing for GB at that point. You just turned up with your crew, and if you were the fastest 8 and 4 pair, you went? Or did there wasn't really any mixing, selection, things like that?
Yeah, there wasn't. It did start to happen, and that might be part of the story later on. I think what you're saying about funding is accurate. I mean, our parents used to run, dances, discos, I think they called them there, to raise funds. We were very fortunate that London Rowing Club, who basically gave us a boat, we kind of had choices. We would go to Tradesman, which was my club, but there was a 4 there already. There was Thames Rowing Club that one of the Ealing teachers, David Gramolt, was involved with, and they kind of were like, we don't think you're that good really. And then London Rowing Club that said, we'll have you, and we'll give you a car leash, which was like, the dog's bollocks boat that had there. And they were supportive to us. They had people like the then president, Farn Cartmail, who, didn't give us loads of money, but that first season in 76 was pretty much a domestic season. I think we had one international race in Ratzeburg and Knott's International Regatta. So, and it was a thing, if you were going to do it, you committed all in. So all of us were, so my head then said, do you want to go to university at Cambridge? Because I think it was a Catholic school and there was a Catholic-based college. And I was like, no, because I'm rowing in London. So I went to University of London. Ian went to King's College, University of London. John was, I think, I don't know, you went to Roehampton College at the time. So all three of us said, we're going to be based in London. Derek, who was the fourth guy in our crew, he was living and working in London. So, we didn't have any sources of income, really. Student grants and parental support, and that was it.
I guess it didn't take long for you also to catch the bug and for rowing and decide, I really like this. I'm gonna just put all my chips on the table and just go for it. Especially if you're choosing to row in London over going to a prestigious university like Cambridge. Not that UL isn't, but it takes so many people rowing, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it was interesting, really. I don't know quite. I think Cambridge is a fantastic university and Oxford too. But relatively then, it was like, well, I think I can do better in terms of rowing. Row at a higher standard.
That was purely, it's got to be focused on you, because like you say, in the context of the day, GB hasn't won anything at Senior Worlds for a pretty long time. It's not, I started rowing in 2001, so the beginning of this boom of look what you can do, look what Britain is capable of. There's a pathway. If you start doing well at school, you get invited onto junior camps, this whole sort of system in front of you. But you guys were just like, I want to do this because I love it and I think I could do better.
Yeah. The stories that Jim Clark told, it was kind of like I was an international rower before I was an international rower, because I just lived in that world.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the formative things for me was Jim was racing as part of the British 8 in the 74 World Championships. And I was 16 then, and I did work for British Airways for about 3 weeks to get some money to travel to Switzerland. So I basically took my tent, and because the train basically goes around a big corner when it goes into Lucerne.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So basically I thought, right, I'll walk and find a lake, and because I've been in the Scouts, geeky thing, and so I thought I'll just camp by the lake, I'll just put my tent up. So I just went walking out of the station in the direction, because I hadn't clocked it, went round a bend. So I was basically walking the opposite way to the lake, and I walked into Lucerne, through Lucerne, and up a hill, which was, it was in the housing estate. And I thought, I've no idea. I didn't talk to anyone. I thought, well, I'll just camp here on this hill thing. And then people were giving me really odd looks, as you would, because you can't do anything out the ordinary in Switzerland. Yeah. And so I spent the night camped in the middle of this housing estate, and then the next day I then found the lake and, got down there. There weren't really any accreditations. And saw Jim. Some of the tradesman guys that were out there kind of took me in, so I got to a proper campsite. But, I saw Britain win that amazing silver medal in the eights, which was, sensational. And then Jim Clark said, look out for this East German 4, they're really tasty, which was Breedskemaga Decker. And that was 74. They won their first world title that year. And then 77, I was lined up on the start next to them. It was and these guys were really sort of heroes. So, I think it was great to be immersed in that world from an early age.
What a story. Also, how it is just a testament to how far your passion can take you, right? If you're just willing to just take your backpack and go.
Yeah.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I guess you've talked about it in 77, first senior worlds, sort of the year after coming out of juniors. How did that feel like you said, being on the start line?
It wasn't a given that we would get the World Championship selection.
Right.
There were selectors. I think Ron Needs might have been chairman of selectors then.
I remember
And we were a reasonable speed, but it was kind of like touch and go. And that's what David was good at, that we were the fastest four in the UK. But, international regattas, we were like B final standard.
Mm-hmm.
We'd won the Wifold Cup the year before at Henley, and actually that year we'd won the stewards, but the Bulgarians never turned up, so it's like a row over. But David pushed really hard, so we did get selection that year in 77, and it was, I guess I'd always thought it would happen. In terms of being optimistic, I just assumed there would be a progression, and that we'd done juniors. Okay, we'd had a year out of juniors in 76, and then it's like, well, obviously we'll go to the Worlds, but I don't think I realised quite how close it was. And the one thing that we had about going that year was there wasn't really a chance of making the A final. We were a B final crew. The standard in British rowing was lower there. They were prepared to send a young crew that would race in the B final. So we had individual crews that we would try and target, maybe like the Bulgarians or the West Germans as it then was. It was in Amsterdam, which was a great place to go. Didn't really sample much of it. Apart from the last night party at Near House, which was
I bet.
Nice.
yeah,
By the state of their jackets, they do party hard.
yeah, the East Germans were just way out and won. I saw them win because they had the B final and then the A final came down. I saw the East Germans beat the New Zealanders, and then you kind of used to do a row past. But it was a good, solid year, and we had this focus like we're going to do Moscow, and I think the thing that changed for us, Derek was in the bows, Derek Bond, and for some reason that winter, and I still don't know why, Derek said he didn't want to do it or couldn't do it anymore. So it was like we had three, and then there was a guy called Dave Townsend, who was a UL rower who'd been to the Olympics he was about 2 years older than us. He'd been to the games in 76 as part of the British Four, which was in the B final. Didn't do very well. And I knew him because he was at my university. He was going to a couple of lectures there. And, I said to David, there's this guy, I'm not sure he's doing much. So it was like, I'd ask, are you interested in coming to row with us? And Dave was like the thing that made us into from a B final young crew into A final potential medal contender. He was, and I think you need someone like, if you look at the three man in a lot of fours, you need someone that is going to row really long. You need someone that's got great solidity around the back turn and can just like hold the boat there and take time around the back turn and really set up, So I was like mad crazy at stroke. And funny enough, there was quite a bit of tension between me and Dave sometimes in the boat. But he always wanted me to be smoother, and I was like, "Well, row harder." So we'd have arguments about that, and
you need that though, don't you? Because you need both. You need people push. You can't just have one person's digging it down one way. It has to be smooth, but you have to work.
Yeah, and I think it's rowing with someone better than you. Like he was, better than us. He'd had international Olympic experience. And so it was like Christmas, Dave's in the crew and Dave committed to Moscow. So, we were, in a sense, far more competitive. when he came into the crew.
79 in Bled, you then came put on the medal tables.
Well, I think our first, so, you know, I always used to look, where's the World Championships going to be?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it going to be a great trip? And like 78 World Championships was in Carapiro.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, so what they're going to do is they're going to take the team out to Sydney for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks or something like that, for a training camp at Sydney Rowing Club, which was like, you know,
Wow.
go to Australia, go to
Holiday.
and then we're going to fly to New Zealand, and it was like, you know, Carapiro. So, you know, we'd had a sort of half-decent season. I think we had to miss Henley that year because somebody was ill in the crew. But, you know, the deal was make the A final because we hadn't done the year before. Well, you know, we went to the first heat and we were racing. In the first heat, we were racing the Russians. Now, the Russians had beaten the East Germans, Britskamaga Zembla-Deka, in Klagenfurt or somewhere, maybe an Eastern regatta. So we knew they were really quick. And so we lined up, you know, and I can't remember the other crews in the heat. But basically, we're like rowing down the course and the Russians are like back there and we're in the lead. So we won our heat and qualified directly for the final. And, you know, that was so completely unexpected that Tanner, he had no idea. He basically hadn't written a training program for what would happen if we did qualify for the final. But we qualified directly for the final. And then in the final, so we're rowing along, and I didn't know too much of what was going on. But, you know, we got to 500 and we're like ahead of the East, which was like, you know, that never happened. And then we're going through like to 1,000, and Dave Townsend looks across and he sees the East and he thinks, shit, you know, we're in gold medal position. What he didn't know was the Russians had fucked off. They were like, you know,
So they were just
2
taking
or 3
it easy.
lengths ahead. Yeah. And then at just 1,000, the East Germans like went into huge overdrive and they sprinted right back and they lost the Russians by about a half a metre or something. Like, that was ahead of us. You could hear the buzzer about 6 seconds ahead of us, but we got into bronze medal position. So that was like, you know, literally that medal is now ruined because I wore it for a week. You know, because I slept in it. I just like didn't take it off. I bought an East German rowing vest, which was, you know, those things at the back of the boathouse, I think, for $20 or something like that. So it's a great championships. But of course, then that put us into the situation of having to match it in Bled. And that was quite a challenge because the Russians were there, the East Germans who'd beaten us were there. The Czech crew that, you know, we beat, they had a new crew that was really fast. And I guess we thought we were the best of the West in that sense.
I was going to say, was there a sense, again, speaking to Tim, when he did the junior pair with Matt and they beat the East Germans, he said there was that real sense of, we know these guys are doing something that we're not doing. And was there sort of like feeling like, okay, Russia and East Germany are ahead of us, but we know they're playing around, or did you not really know that kind of stuff at the time?
Yeah, we knew that stuff. I knew that stuff from Jim Clark in terms of, and you know, because coaches like Bob Janasek, who was over here, had worked in the Eastern European system. There were defectors that came across. I think one of the guys from the East German 8, the bowman that won in Sydney, Matthias, can't remember his surname, young kid. I mean, he came out at Bled in the regatta in 79, I think, and you know, he was kind of open about the blue pills. I think, you know, we thought they were great athletes. So, you know, Briggs Gamega, they won the pairs in 72. They won the 4 in 76. I mean, these were, you know, Margaret and Decker were amazing. So you could kind of think, well, they're better than us, kind of, in that sense. But there was always the drug thing. And, you just... so with me, I kind of normalised being beaten by those two as opposed to being aspirational, like, all right, how do we beat them? You know, because we could have been on a different training program. It was easier to say, okay, we'll settle for being the best of the West. We'll set, you know, bronze medal. So winning a bronze medal was like, you know, because Jim Clark and that, you know, Clark and Hart and Bailey in the double scull. You know, these were guys that were up here. So and it was unusual. Then it was unusual for Britain to win medals like that. So if you could win a medal, that was like, you know, once in your career, which we did in 78. That was like you could die happily. So, and, you know, we've talked about this as a crew because the Moscow 4, but that we were never aspirational. Like David Tanner, you tell us what we need to do to beat the East Germans or Russians, because we were getting better towards 79 and 80, and we'll do it. I don't know what, like, were we on 10 sessions, 11 sessions a week or something like that, but
still a pretty decent amount of training.
Difficult as well in hindsight is to look back and go, why didn't we go for it? But at the time, you know, you put these barriers in place. You know, how am I going to beat these people that we know are you know, messing about with drugs as well?
Does it come down to possibly like maybe not realizing the potential that you guys were holding in your crew and in your speed that you could unlock?
I think that's a great shout. And to my way of thinking, there was this kind of zone of expectation that, you know, there are good crews up here, which, you know, we can talk about in terms of 84 when it comes along. But these crews up here, they're like great athletes. So probably they're better and stronger than us. You know, they're certainly bigger than me. And yes, and they do drugs as well. So actually, let's leave those two crews there, and we need to do the training program that's going to get us, you know, a shot at a bronze medal.
Sure.
And there was a sort of not to say comfort, but I don't ever think we questioned that really.
I mean, I would say, like, you're certainly not the first or last to do it. You know, how many countries avoided the pair for 8 years when they were like, they're unbeatable. You know, or like Hodge and Reed went for it and people watched it and they're well, if they're not going to get them, you know, like, it is. You do have to be a bit tactical, you know, because nothing's a given and your bronze isn't a given. If you know, if you're really busy going out trying to win that gold, all of a sudden you can lose your chance at a podium. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I know you had Alex Partridge on the show, but you know, I remember in Beijing doing the commentary on Britain and Canada, you know, and the British 8 looked amazing in that heat. They won the heat, and obviously Canada had that amazing style about them, and it's like head to head, and I understand this is what I understand happened, but it might not have gone like this. But Jurgen, as chief coach, basically was kind of like on the night before or whenever he talked to them, you need to make sure a silver. And the Canadians, I think, toasted them. I don't think the British ever really troubled the Canadians. The Britain won the silver, but then I think a number of the athletes in the crew were like, we never really went out for the gold medal. And they say where they felt resentment. I think some of them did feel resentment. And then people like, you know, maybe it was Rick Edgington in that crew. So this is what happened in you know, 4 years later in London, where, you know, it was like, well, we're not going to make that mistake again. We are going to go for gold, which led to the British, you know, getting their bows in front of the Germans. The third 500 at Dorney.
And also being this far from missing out on the bronze, and that's the risk. And I think in international racing, like, people forget that, you know, the margins are so small now. You know, look at the 4 in Tokyo. From my perspective, like, they went for it. Went for it, and if that means at the end of the day they didn't get what they wanted, but at the end of the day, I'd rather if I get to the Olympic final, you're there to try and win gold, whatever that means. You do it.
And sometimes you can be so focused on just beating like one opponent, you don't see the other one coming from the other lane, because you're so focused on, for example, looking in your left lane. Okay, are we going to beat these guys? Are we going to like challenge them for gold? And then someone else can just get their bows in front.
I remember talking to Stan Aludis after I don't know why, but it was at Eton Excelsior. There was something with the parents, and he was like, say, distraught. He was completely down. And I remember saying to him, look, you've got a bronze medal, that's fantastic, that's amazing. And, that you couldn't see it because they were that focused on goal. I think there were one or two in that crew that thought, okay, we got the bronze. I think maybe Greg was one of the ones, Greg Searle, that was, okay, I'm happy with this bronze medal. But such was the whole thing. There's another. I was doing interviews, or I was at Caversham for something, and the BBC were doing interviews, and they were talking to the crews about what do you expect, and the men were all going, gold medal. It was like, and I remember even with Steve Redgrave, who was in the quad then, and it was like, we're here for gold, and. I think they made the final, but it was like, well, you're not going to win gold because these and these are in front of you. And there was one of the British Women's 8, and she was a Scottish lady, I can't remember her name, in the middle of the boat, 5C maybe. And BBC were kind of saying, and what do you think you're going to win? And it kind of really stopped her in the tracks. And she then looked at the crew that was over behind her, and she said... bronze, in a way that it's like, well, that's not really convincing, but I have to say something.
Sure.
Yeah, but then that sort of comes back to your thing. You didn't have that belief that you could beat those crews, and you think that was part of the reason why you never did. And I think it can sound arrogant for someone to say, especially when you know potentially, you sort of know they're not going to get it. But ultimately, without that, I like the saying, whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're probably right. Without the belief it's possible, you never will. And you'll kind of resign yourself to, oh, yeah, there they go. Yeah, we knew that was going to happen. It's all over. Or you try and put yourself in a position like that British. I mean, I've got the amount of times in my career where you just go, I know I cannot sustain this pace, and I know I'm going to have to go to a place that is so dark. And I think having spoke to Alex, he sort of mentioned with Stan felt like he sort of let everyone down because he ran out, but it's because he just took it to a place that he'd never been before. Completely. And I have so much respect for someone who can do that, because even as an international racing, that is so hard to just let your brain go to this place.
And if you're not going to do that at the in the Olympic final, when else are you going to do it?
Yeah. It's a really good point. I mean, I'm just reflecting back on races, and I'm thinking the hardest races that I had were races when we were going shit. And, you tried, you basically were in third, fourth place in the semi-final, and it was like you or this other crew.
Yeah.
And you knew you weren't going well because there were two other crews, that you should be level with out in the front. And it was like burying yourself just to see if you could get that third place. And sometimes, talking with Caroline Lynn, so she won couple of golds in Beijing, I think, with the US Women's 8, and in London. And I think she stroked that London 8 maybe, at the USA 8. And she talked about feeling guilty that she hadn't rowed harder in 2012 because she crossed the line and she didn't feel like, completely wasted. But, sometimes it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, you get it right.
Yeah, it's not. And I think there is burying yourself in that way. But there's other times when you're rowing that you are just in a zone and it feels like it's flying and you're out in front of the field.
Talk about flow state.
Yeah.
John Collins spoke a little bit about that after Tokyo when he was racing the double with Graham. He was feeling like he was working the hardest in the crew, and then I think it was a coach that pointed out to him, listen mate, you're not getting paid to work the hardest, you're getting paid to move the boat fast. And sometimes it's not about just completely wasting yourself. So I understand where that feeling of guilt can come from and what it's associated with, but it's not always the way. There's rowing's a bit more of a complex equation than that.
It's also just comes with the territory. If you're someone that's pushing limits, you have to be extremely self-critical. There's sort of no way that you can get to the top and not do that. So sometimes you just need to understand that you're always going to pick pick the bits you didn't like of it. You do like a 2K test, you get a PB, you think, God, that felt too easy. I definitely could do. 4 weeks later, you do it again, you go off harder, you blow. Yeah. And then you realise, no, I just nailed it. Like, it wasn't easy. I just got it right that time. Things like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's right, sort of walking the tightrope, isn't it? Like, you want to be on that edge, but if you go over the top, it's all over.
Yeah, completely.
Awesome. So I just wanted to ask you about your first Olympics. How did that come about, the selection? Did you feel any different level of pressure, for example, than when approaching World Champs?
Yeah, so that was the story, which kind of goes back the year before in 79 when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and you kind of heard things about, potential boycott, which you never paid too much attention to. And then it ramped up in 1980. So the whole context of 1980 was like the boycott, like this thing, we're going to get selected to go to the Olympics, we're the fastest four, and we may not happen. So I think that there was huge pressure from the British government to the Rowing Association and to the Olympic Association not to send crews. And one by one, Olympic associations and they fought it. The Americans fought it, the athletes, but to no avail. The Americans pulled out, and then the West Germans pulled out. I say Norwegians pulled out. I think in the air. So I think the New Zealanders took off to come to Europe and learned in the air that they weren't going. I hope I got this right. And the Australians took off, and when they walked off the plane, they found out they were going. So we were part of a campaign. Like, as athletes, we got sent pictures of burnt and mutilated Afghan children, and how could you,
there was that sort of sense in the country.
Yeah, there was. And I think that was kind of extreme, but there's always been a sense, I think, in Britain of, you take information and you decide yourself. And the British Olympic Association basically stood firm. Although my understanding is that Chris Davidge, who was, a great rower and on the Olympic Association, that he didn't support the team going. He thought they should boycott. And we had so the British Olympic Association voted to go. There were 4 sports that were kind of, because rowing's a pretty establishment sport. So we were in danger, like equestrian didn't go, hockey didn't go, sailing didn't go, and I think shooting. All pretty establishment sports, and so rowing was really close on so there was a vote for the Rowing Association, which we kind of lobbied and we did all that stuff, and the Rowing Association voted to go. So it was like, oh fucking hell, and so that was the background to us going for the Olympics, and within that you kind of had to stay focused on your training and do all the stuff. And then in the meantime, so the year before in Bled, we'd raced the East Germans who won, the Czechs who came second, us were third, the Russians, that Russian four who came fourth. Can't remember who was fifth, whatever, but it was kind of like, okay, so our opposition is basically Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So, we'd always beaten American fours, New Zealand fours, so it was kind of like, okay, it's, a really valid games, because we're right in the middle of competition. Mm-hmm. Added to that, the 2 Swiss crews that won a bronze in the double and the pair the year before, I think because of the boycott, I don't know why, but they basically decided to make up this Swiss Superfera. And they came into the 4, and at the regatta at Lucerne, they beat us. So it was like, oh shit, this is it might be a boycott, but it's a really tough event. And then the whole excitement of going to the Olympics. I remember, the kit is one thing. And, I remember Jim Clark getting all this kit from Montreal and, the various stuff. Well, for Moscow, most of the people providing kit pulled out.
Right, yeah.
Because of government pressure. So there wasn't that much money. And so literally, the kit you got was like, a T-shirt to race in, a kind of blazer and trousers, tracksuit, and that was about it, really.
It's not like the 40 kilos of kit they get these days.
It's nothing. So, and then going to the Olympics, it was like, there was no British flag. So, it was just Britain will, compete under the Olympic flag. So no opening ceremony.
It's having spoken to a lot of athletes, it's very much sort of Tokyo and COVID vibes, in the lead up, not knowing if it's going to happen, if it's going to get delayed. Like, it's really interesting to see like very similar kind of.
Yeah, I think it really was like that. The Olympic Village, it's got, you walked in and I got this picture in the book actually of just like empty flagpoles, because if you were there, countries saying, well, we're not going to show our flag. The idea was to make a gesture to the Soviet public, like, this matters.
Yeah.
Well, of course, they had no idea that this was going on. All they saw was athletes, because there were athletes. And, there was just one, Dick Palmer, the chef de mission. He was the guy marching with an Olympic flag behind the Great Britain banner in the opening ceremony. So Soviet TV just showed Great Britain, here's a bloke, and then just pulled off there were athletes that marched. And we got loads of telegrams from Russian tractor collectives in Siberia saying, thanks so much for coming, and, and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
But the Olympics themselves, I remember, sitting on a table. I think all athletes say this about, you see people you've seen on the telly, like Alberto Wantarina, who I think was a Cuban who'd won 400 and 800 in Montreal, I want to say. And it's like he comes with his tray and he like sits down, not next to you, but like 2 seats away. And you're going, shit, there's Alberto Wantarina. And it's like, and I remember John Bow, there was a Cuban boxer called Teofilio Stevenson, looked a bit like Arlie, and boxed like him too, heavyweight. And John was just like, he was walking back from dinner and he just thought, like, which one of us is going to move? Because they were like, just buy a thing here. So John thought, I'll just carry on, just walk with it. And the look he got from Stevenson, and John thought, oh, shit, he just like, and moved out of the way. So that there were all those moments, but I think the first heat that we had, the race, I was, so literally I tried to avoid feeling nervous, I think, because the sense of the occasion. So I remember taking a book down to the course and reading a book till quite, soon before the race. And for me, I wasn't in the zone. It wasn't right. And we had, like, I think the worst row we'd ever had as a four. I think we might have come in last. And it was just the sense of being overwhelmed by the sense of occasion. And I hadn't dealt with it correctly. I hadn't dealt with it right. Which obviously we made up for in the rep, which was probably as a four our best row. And we had to win it to be sure of getting to the final, because they were going to make it a 4-lane final if there were crosswinds on the Moscow course. Mm-hmm. So we won it. We beat the Romanians, did really well. And I remember there being really in the moment and really feeling the nerves. And, yeah, I've got to be part of this. So there was a real learning process. And I think you could look at a lot of, Olympic crews. New Zealand Day is obviously just one example who get better because they've gone through the rep, and they kind of learn.
Yeah, I've had competitions where I felt so happy that we had the rep, because you're like, we were not ready just to get straight through, and then other ones where sort of felt like it's either way, isn't it? If you have to go for the rep, you convince yourself that we get an extra race and that will benefit us. And if you go straight through, then you convince yourself, well, we've had one less race, so we'll be, whichever one you do, you try and make it work for yourself. It's funny you mentioned New Zealand. I remember when we had Emma Dicon, she was saying when they first got to Rio, the whole team sits in front of someone who was like, do not go up and ask for autographs or photos with famous people you've seen on TV. We're not doing it. It's not what we do. So I'm like, okay, yeah. She's walking past, Usain Bolt or someone. I was interested. So what equipment, what was the boat and blades you're using in 1980?
So, mentioned earlier on when we chatted this West German boat, the Carleash. So we rode that in 76 to win the Wifolds. Then Bob Janasek, who was coaching Britain in the Montreal Olympics, he kind of went into a boat building business to build carbon fibre boats in Britain. They were called Carbercraft. I don't know if you remember, but they kind of eventually morphed into Ailings.
Okay.
But so it was like a black carbon fibre boat.
Wow.
The British 8 had an Empacker. And the British 8 and the double in Montreal, they had these boats one was called Carbon Cub, and the double had that, and another was called Carbon Tiger. And I think there was an entrepreneur called Tony Howarth that, built them. And they'd done some really fast times in it, but I think the British 8 rode in the Packer for the final. I can't remember what the double rode in. So there were these new boats. So you kind of wanted, that was it, and it was British. And so we rode in Carbercraft. So we got a black Carbercraft, which kind of was a bit bendy, in the sun. So they changed the colour. I think it was blue in Bled in 79. And then it was a white Carbercraft, lovely boat, quite stiff for the Moscow Olympics. And the blades we used, so essentially you could use Ailings blades that were kind of wooden with Macon spoons. But the Olympic 8 and that had used Sutton's blades. So Sutton used to work for Ailings and then went off. And actually there was a big thing because the four with Dave Townsend in the Montreal Olympics, they wanted to row with Sutton's blades, but Richard Ailey was in the four and said, I can't row with Sutton's blades. So they had a real thing about this. So it was very, very controversial. But we rowed with Sutton's blades. But we always used to try things out. Like I think Ailings made some, like the aluminium blades that we, I remember trying out and things like that. But we kind of stuck with Sutton's.
Sure.
Which were just normal wooden blades and Macon spoons.
Yeah. So then in the final, were you happy with that performance? Like you said, you probably were happy with the rep, but obviously again coming away with the bronze, you didn't let anyone else get you.
Essentially, it's interesting when you look at what we were doing. I mean, we kind of we weren't left off the start. We were quite competitive to 200, 250. And then crews just moved away from us. So like the Czechs moved away from us, the Russians moved away, the East Germans were gone. And then we were kind of moving okay, but our big thing was like third quarter. And we used to have...
Oh, you obviously instilled that in the British team.
Oh, well, the thing, what you do is different. So you weren't like redlining it, like doing, you basically go out and above like what you were doing. So you say you were going along at 37, you go to 39, but you wouldn't go to 39 for the whole 500. You'd go for that for like 20 strokes. They'd be, fucking big
Put the
strokes.
afterburners on, yeah.
And so it was like you used to do bursts like that, and then you come off the burst and you say like something go. So there'd be a go for the burst and a go back into right. So we really creamed that third 500, and that took us. And the Swiss four, that they were like, don't know what was happening to them. They were at the back of the field. The Romanians were back there. We'd left the Czechs in the third quarter. And we moved right back on the Russians, who were in seconds. Like we got overlap with 500 to go. But basically, we wasted ourselves. And so in the final 500, it was right. It's the bronze medal. Just make sure you get the bronze medal. And we weren't hanging on. Like the Czechs came back at us a bit, but that was our medal. It was just like, you know, as I said, you could die happy because you won a world medal. Well, all I ever wanted in my life was like world medal, Olympic medal was like up there. So I was absolutely the most fantastic thing ever.
I can imagine.
And I had no aspirations to get any different medal at all. It was a great row in challenging circumstances, and a real testament to what we could do as a crew and what we'd done for the last 3 years.
And again, like probably the only British crew that came back with a medal.
No,
it was the double.
Oddly enough, no. The double. Jim Clark was in a double with Chris Bailey then, but. What happened? There was this amazing H race, and we were we'd look at this A, and I think arrogantly, do you know, like boats in the team? I don't know how supportive they are of each other now, but you kind of used to take a vicarious pleasure if you were better than another boat, or it wasn't like being a good team. So we weren't really one team in that proper sense, but. The men's A had this fantastic race against the East Germans. Their cox Moynihan, the rudder broke somewhere in the middle of the race, so Moynihan had to reach behind him and steer it with his hands from the T-bar.
Yeah.
Wow. And they got a silver medal. That's like Richard Stanhope, who was in the stroke seat, Malcolm McGowan, a lad from Hampton School, Chris Mahoney, who was fantastic rudder.
It's the same Stanhope's dad.
Yeah. Who was it? Andrew Justice, God rest his soul, in the 5 seat, and a host of others. Were we pissed off we got a bronze and we got a silver? Probably, because we kind of thought, well, we're better than you. But that's just stupid stuff, really. I mean, it was amazing. And there was a bronze medal for the pair of Malcolm Carmichael and Charlie Wiggin.
That must be Emily's dad.
Yeah. Carmichael, he used to row down here. Same time.
Yeah. I was going to say, so like, hopefully, despite the fact that the 8 got the silver, like, you still got to enjoy your bronze in the moment, and the celebrations still went large, like you said. Like, obviously,
the best thing. So essentially, the Swiss 4 had brought down a crate of champagne to celebrate, because they were basically, and there was another Swiss 4, because they'd beaten this other Swiss 4 that we always used to race, and they were there in a Cobbs 4. So essentially, we went to a party in the Swiss, we were in these tower blocks, in the Swiss sort of tower block flat, and one of the guys in this Swiss Cobbs 4, we were really matey with. We weren't matey with the other Swiss 4 so much. He sneaked down into the chef de mission's bedroom and got the crate of champagne out of his wardrobe.
Nice.
And sneaked back up. So we were drinking champagne, and then this Swiss Cops 4, they, because they said, look at this shitty Russian apartment, and it was like the whole, like the sort of where the electrical fees. They pulled this out and just like out the window. And then they start trashing the flat. Like the fridge, and we were on the 9th floor, the fridge went right out the window.
This is like rock star behaviour.
And it was kind of, it was. And it was like, and then it was like, we better get out of here.
Yeah.
So I remember walking out the front door and then just like seeing police like running into
the other way.
Flat. David Tanner got us 3 days, because basically you did the Olympics, you went home on the next, like Tokyo, but he got us 3 days in Moscow. So we were able to do Red Square, and have photographs taken and stuff like that. My mum and dad were out there. They had to travel by circuitous routes to get there, which was great. So yeah, we enjoyed it, and that's what I wanted from rowing.
So, and then having got that, what did you think that you would continue? Did you think that you'd done enough and you would walk away happy? What made you want go back for more?
So I think what you have to understand about my psychology is rowing is part of my life. So it's essentially, if it's part of your life, then you're essentially you are going to row. So there is never a decision about am I going to carry on. It's just how am I going to be connected to this sport. So
Because you still row now.
yeah, well, yeah. So it's still it's like that now. So in terms of post Olympics, so I guess there were two options post Olympics, and the three of us decided to carry on. The World Championships were in Munich, and it was like that East German fall was stopping. So yeah, why wouldn't we have one option was to go with the hero Jim Clark, who I'd rowed with. He'd rowed with us. He subbed into our boat a few times, and we'd gone all right. Another option was to get Andy Holmes, who was that's a more left field option. But I think, given lots of things, like with hindsight, it would have been better for us to have put Andy in the boat. Jim was in the boat. He had back issues. I found it incredibly pressured rowing with my hero and teacher. You know, he'd get really pissed off with me sometimes about the rowing stuff, or I was late for outings, and there was a lot of pressure in that year. We kind of had a crap season till Lucerne, where we ended up. We got a medal at Lucerne, and then we were flying in the training camp. We were flying, like really going fast. And then we got to Munich. We had an outing, and it all fell apart. I was kind of uncomfortable, slightly away from my rigger. Ended up coming 10th. Didn't make the final, and the whole thing was, I guess everything I'd done, like from, say, the J16s, you know, okay, so we didn't get junior selection in J17, but, you know, we were second. Everything had been like a progress. And this was the first year that everything fell off and didn't really know how to deal with it. I remember going out into Munich away from the team hotel and, you know, thinking you'll get away from it, but you can't get away from yourself, can you? Yeah. So that was pretty disastrous. You know, to make it more disastrous, the eight, the one that got silver in Moscow, they got a silver medal behind the Russians. The four with Andy Holmes was in the final. They led the East Germans till about 12:50 or something. It was like phenomenal. And so yeah, and it broke apart our four. Ian McNuff stopped. John Beattie wanted to carry on. I was like, David Tanner stopped, and that was like, what are you going to do? And so there was a new kind of squad thing that Penny Shooter, who was then the chief coach, decided to inaugurate.
Was that based out of Hammersmith, or?
Yeah, based out of Hammersmith. John Beattie decided to go to that. I kind of thought, you know, I basically thought, fuck you, I'm not going into that. And not quite sure why. I remember Richard Ayling, who was then coaching with Penny, sitting in my mum and dad's front room trying to persuade me to come to Hammersmith. And instead I decided I would go, and there was a young quad scull that had come 7th with Adam Clift, Eric Sims, it would have been there, was it Julian Scrivener and Steve Redgrave. And they done really well, and I thought, I'm going to go and be part of Spracklen's group and be part of that quad scull. So I can do cutting my nose off to spite my face very well.
I think it's interesting that you said that you asked yourself that question, what are you going to do now? Because I think if anyone wants to get to the top, there's going to be a point in your career where things aren't going to go well, and you're going to have to stand back and ask yourself a question. I think, the sort of champions find a way. it's very easy for some of your crew to go, you know what, I got my Olympic medal, I'm happy, I can walk away. But for you, like you said, it's just rowing was a part of your life. It was like, I'm not willing to walk away from this. I think you see this as well. Like, I came up with Will Satch. He got his bronze in London. Then he had to have an operation, his heart. He'd had his hip operation. Like these kind of things. There's a lot of other people who go, happy with what I've got, I'll go and do something else. But he got through to Rio and got that gold.
Yeah. When you're looking at someone's career from the sidelines, you can think, oh, it's just a natural linear progression. You've done this, then you're going to the next Olympics. It just so happens, and you don't actually know sometimes what challenges you have to overcome within that story, or what bridges you have to open, or which windows you need to kick down.
Even more so now because of the success of the British team. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to go and get another one. Oh yeah, of course they won another gold. Like. It's not like that on the inside.
I was teaching, and I was a full-time teacher working at the biggest comprehensive in Lewisham, which was then Bishop Thomas Grant. And this was in 81, and I'd asked for time off to go to we did an altitude training camp in South Africa, and I'd asked for time off, and I'd been to see the head, and the head sort of reluctantly said, yes, but what he meant was I didn't realise that I could then formally apply for time off, which I hadn't done. I'd just gone. So he was like, where'd you been? And then he was like, so giving me a bollocking. And then he was like, okay, we want you to be like a serious teacher now, like a form tutor. And, take this career seriously. And I'm like, well, that's not me. And David Tanner said, read in the Times educational supplement, he said there was a job in Hampton going, Hampton School. So it was like, why didn't you, apply for that? So I phoned up Hampton, and this was like on the Thursday, and got the secretary and said, interested in that job, the history job. She said, I'm sorry, the applications have closed. We're interviewing on Tuesday. And I said, oh, God. She said, God, I was really hoping because I'm an international rower. She said, oh, you'd have probably got the job. So anyway, I then, got through to the deputy head, and he talked to the head, and he said, oh, so the next day, Friday, it was like, come in and, we'll at least talk to you. Yeah. And so there was an interview with the deputy head, the head of history, and the headmaster. And actually the new head of rowing, which was going to be Steve Gunn then. The head of history didn't want me. He wanted, a proper like Oxbridge graduate thing. And he was me from University of London, joint honours degree, only a 2-2. So it was like, that's not great.
That's a real.
And I remember saying, Gavin, who was, I remember saying, and you would never do this now. Like, I can only work here if you give me. I said I might not need it, but I need 10 days off with pay a year, to do training camps. Yeah. If and this was like, and that was just. That's how it was going to be. So, and they decided over the weekend, and he said, right, we'll give you that for 2 years or something, as long as you agree to coach the second eight.
Okay, yeah.
So, so basically the headmaster and the deputy head, who was a rowing coach, and Steve Gunn, overrode the head of history, the new head of history. So I got the job at Hampton, and I'm still working there now.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I didn't realise it's been that long since you first started teaching that.
September 81 I started at Hampton.
Rowing can take you places.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I guess obviously you've mentioned him jumping in that quad with that sort of young monster, Steve Redgrave, who at the time was not what we all know him to be now. How was that? And Eric Sims as well, who we bumped into on the circuit last year. We had a good chat with him at a couple of the regattas. How was it being a part of that? Like you said, did you draw strength from sort of being the underdog or not being part of that system? Like, we're going to go and screw them over here?
No, I didn't do underdogs at that stage. These were kids, right? Yeah. And basically, okay, Steve and Adam had junior silver medals, which was the same as me, like in 1980 in Haselwinkel. They lost to Langer was in the East German quadrant one.
Oh yeah,
double Olympic champion.
Yeah, Thomas Langer.
Yeah, and it was like, okay, I need to learn how to scull, but essentially I'm the dog's bollocks and you kids are like, obviously, like the fastest sculler, there was a thing between Steve and Adam, but the fastest sculler was Redders. But we used to do, with Spracklen, it was completely different to Tanner. He was like incredible coach. We used to do these races, we used to paddle to the top on the Marlow stretch up to Cookham, and then we turn around and you kind of then, had 3 or 4 scullers on one side of the river, 3 or 4 scullers on the other, and you basically race back on the side of the river. So sometimes you'd have an inside bend, and, it was great. And then, you'd hear Adam occasionally, like, he did this big fucking hell, because he's like, he has that accent, because he just rode himself into a tree. Because you're against the stream. And
that's a tight river as well.
Yeah. And then so I remember one piece. So Redders was on the other side, and I think it was me and him, and there was a rate cap. And the only way I could be competitive, vaguely, with Stephen was to go higher on rate.
Yeah.
So he was like, he could see me rating higher, and he'd shout across, "Martin Cross," like, and I just wouldn't pay any attention.
Well, we've always said that's the job of the person behind to push. That's kind of your job, isn't it?
Yeah. We never did weights. I think I was in a weights room once, and I remember being struck. Steve was there in his slippers. What the fuck? Steve in his slippers. So we mainly did stuff on the water, and then I didn't really know how to scull properly. I was, I think, very front-end aggressive. So none of this thing, I didn't have the technical skill to pinch the boat, take it on the heels and just wait for the front end. It was like smack, which is not how you want to, but that's what I thought I brought to the crew. Like, that's how you row a boat. And then we had all sorts of trouble in that quad, like rowing. We tried it with me at stroke. We tried it with Steve at stroke, and we raced in different. And there was the British A, who was then, this that I avoided going to, like Malcolm McGowan. I remember at Vichy, they were singing a song to take the piss out of us because we were getting beaten 10 lengths down in the blue carver craft. And we were a bit, the butt of jokes. And there was another story there about that year. We stayed the night at Duisburg. We stayed the night at Vichy, and there was water fights, basically water bombs. And we basically stayed the night at Duisburg, and there were more water fights. And then we went out, and we kind of went to a bar, and people were drinking these boots of ale, and there was, and we walked back, and so we were a bit tipsy, and there were some members of the group who started running over cars in the street. Now, the residents were outside on the balconies. So basically the police came, and we were walking back to the sort of flats, and they bunged 6 of us in the car, and then they drove back to where the residents were. And I remember, I think maybe it was Gordon Rankin or someone like that from the A. And he was trying to push me to go over a car, and I said, no, I can't, because I'm in too much trouble, because I got in trouble at Vichy. So I'd stopped him and not walked over any cars. So they took us back to where the residents were, and they looked in, and then they pointed at me because I had a blue jacket on, and they said no. So they hoofed me out of the thing. But basically, also that night, the lightweights, I think with their coach Terry O'Neill, but I don't know if I'm taking the guy who did the coaching for Boys in the Boat.
Mm. Oh yeah.
They had a competition to see how many lightweights they could get in a phone box.
I think I've heard this one, yeah.
And basically the phone box shattered.
Oh.
So people got arrested there. So there were 4 people in the cells.
Wow.
In Duisburg. So this was like, big thing. So basically we got banned from Lucerne as a boat, even though none of us had, like, Redders wasn't involved, Adam Cliff wasn't involved, or Eric. So we had to race. We then went to race at Copenhagen Regatta. So that was kind of, what things happened. But the thing around us, and that year was that we actually made the final. It was like, we were a long way back in the final, but we got to the final. And I think we were about the only British quad to be in the final, I think, since until about 20, I can't remember when they made the final first time, maybe 2010 or something like that, at Carapiro. But but Steve, I ended up at Stroke. Steve was behind me, and Steve wrote in his book, I made the promise to myself never to row behind Martin Cross ever again.
All publicity is good publicity.
Yeah, but the thing was, obviously, it got, with Mike there. So I got Mike, used to being with Mike, and got used to being with Stephen and Adam Clift, who I row with later on.
Yeah. That was 81 or 82?
That was 82.
Yeah.
So championships were in Lucerne that year.
So then what was the decision to move back into a rowing boat? Sweeper boat, I should say. So,
I don't think the results in 82 had been good. I think UL maybe came 5th in the final, in the Cops 4. The 8, Penny Shooters 8, with Andy Holmes, Jim Clark, John Beattie and that lot, they came 10th.
Okay.
Oh, it was like, so I... Basically,
you didn't have a version of the song for them then?
No. It's terrible, really. We weren't more of one team. But so then it was kind of like change. So then what happened was there was this thing. David Tanner was going to come back in. Bob Janasek was going to come back in. The UL coach, Rusty Williams, was going to come back.
Yeah.
So there was this whole thing, like particularly attractive with Bob Janasek, now going to be like a consultant figure. So, it's my old coach, and he kind of been out in 82. I think he was coaching lightweights then. So it was like, we're going to get back rowing. And so it was always going to be rowing. And what it ended up with was a lot of people rowing not very well. If you look at videos, we're like, in terms of smacking the front end. It wasn't a great season. We ended up doing a 4. So we reprised our 4. Ian came back, McNuff, John Beattie, a guy called Richard Budgett, who I rowed with in the Olympics in LA. He was there. He'd got a bronze in 81 in a Cox pair with Tom Cadu Hudson. And basically, we had Budgett in our 4 for Dave Townsend or Jim Clark. So we did our 4 again. He says it was Cops.
Mm-hmm.
And, we got a bronze medal in Lucerne, but we were off the back in the Worlds. It was like, this is the 4 that was good 4, like Adam Cliff, Richard Stanhope, John Blanding, I can't remember the names. They ended off up the back. I'm not sure that there were any other finalists. I think a lightweight, John Melvin, got a medal, but maybe Beryl Mitchell. But basically, it was just like a bad year, and the rowing wasn't great, and the British rowing then decided, okay, we're now going to sweep all this away, and what will happen is we will now have a proper national squad. It'll be run by Penny Shooter. People like Tanner were out. People like Rusty Williams were out. And we are now going to select from a squad. And I was kind of like, so I was really involved in this thing that year, that winter. I was extremely combative, like against this, would you believe? And so I formed with Ian McNuff, who stopped rowing, we formed this thing called the International Rowers and Scullers Club, which was kind of like athlete interest. And we had 120, 130, 40 athletes.
Wow.
At first meeting. Yeah, we had a lot. And the idea was that we kind of stood out against, like that system, squad system for the clubs in that way, and didn't really go anywhere. In fact, funnily enough, the IRSC, as it was then known, still has a bank account which the Molesey Legends pay into when they need to give, donate something for buying a boat or
Sure.
it's still there. But in the sense, so I was extremely combative, and I hadn't gone into Penny's squad in '82, so it was like between this with me and Penny, and they came up with this idea. So she got Spracklen involved, and basically Spracklen was going to coach Redgrave to a single scull. And they said, right, here are groups of rowers who are more suited to Cox rowing, like, maybe because they're more front end. And so there was a sort of Cox 4 group, and Spracklen would lead it, and it had Budget in, who was like Cox 4. It had Beattie in, it had me in, it had Tom Cadou Hudson in, it had Andy Holmes in, and the other, and it had a guy called Paul Wensley, that we'd hit subbed in our boat in '81 for Jim Clark when he was injured, and then with that group, so we had 3 pairs. With that group, we had Redgrave attached that Spracklen was coaching.
Right.
So it worked because you could race off the single and the pairs in that sense. And we, Penny Shooter was like, she raised. We were using a Hampton School Carbercraft, and the seats were crap, polystyrene, and one had broken, and I was trying to take, because they wouldn't give us a boat. Me and John Beattie were in the pair, and I nicked one of the British rowing pairs seats, and Penny Shooter was like, it was smacked me like this. She was so, they were both like, and then they had a group, and the idea, this was the 8s group. So the 8s group were people who knew how to row, and Graham Hall coached that, who took them to silvers in Moscow and Munich in 1881. So you basically had to be smooth and flowy and all that sort of stuff. So you kind of knew your place. Right, I'm not a rower that knows how to row. I just sort of smack it in. And then there was a development group like Cox's 4, like youngsters. So that was the format.
Yeah.
And then what Spracklen knew that he wanted was, so the 3 pairs just bashed hell out of each other. So we did quite an aggressive training program, a lot of high intensity lactate stuff. So over 2 millimoles. There's none of this low intensity paddling or stuff, polarized training. It was all really hard stuff. I was like with John Beattie, who I'd row with in the Moscow Olympics in the 4. So it was like, okay, I want to be the pair. And Cadou Hudson and Budget were in their pair. They won a bronze medal with. And Andy Holmes was like, he kind of got them. Andy was great because he ended up in a pair with Paul Wensley, who was the least experienced and less sort of good guy in the team. But he was like, fuck it, I'll just make it work. So there was a great story at. So we raced at that year. The first race we did was at Zabaudia Regatta.
Oh yeah.
And Beattie and I won in the pair, which was great. We rode through, and then there was a Cox pairs race. So the Cadou Hudson and Budget, and Holmes and Wensley, and basically for some reason just before the start, and there was also like it was lane easy, like because the wind was coming from the sea, so the best lane to have was the lane nearest the shore. So Cadou Hudson and Budget were doing a burst and tipped over and fell in just before the start. So basically, Andy Holmes, like all credit to him, he paddles over to them. They think he's going to help them, but he basically comes and gets the number off their boat because they had a better lane, and then tells them swimming in the water, put the number on our bows.
Wow.
So, that was kind of like, yeah. So we made a big thing of, winning the pairs. We filled the goblet, which I still got at home, with like sparkling wine, and we kind of took it round to the 8 and said, we'd like you to share in our, success.
Yeah.
Which, taking the piss kind of thing. And then, so this was then going to be like crew selection. So Penny and Mike are together, and it was basically, okay, this is going to be the crew. And I think it kind of had, it was me, Andy, Budge, and Tom Hudson. So, I was like, I'd been running a pair with John, and it was like, and we won the pairs thing. So I said, well, I'm not going to run that because I think John should be in it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of had this argument, and I was very stroppy, and this is all, we're supposed to go out rowing, but the day's getting on and on. So then Spracklen and Shooter come up with this new idea, and it was like, right, everyone write down who you want to row with. So they get these things. So I basically wrote down John Beattie in a pair, and then I wrote down another 4, and like Redgrave in a single. And then, it's just, we're waiting again, and like, what they do, we're all like, what the fuck are they doing? And it was like...
Classic waiting around.
Yeah.
I get called into the Land Rover, which, towed the trailer down there. And it was like, you're the only one who's put, that doesn't want to do a 4. With Stephen. And Stephen doesn't want to row, he wants to do the single. Well, the others have put Stephen in there. Well, so I don't want to row with him because he's doing the single scull and he doesn't want to row. So why should I row with it? I want to do a pair with John. So and then out, and then like, I'm back with the guys, like, what did they say? And like, it was all, And then it was essentially, right, okay, we're gonna do a seat race of 3 1500s, and we'll do it with Bow, with John Beattie, Hudson, and Wensley, and we'll see who's the fastest. Mm-hmm. So then I remember Andy was like, well, that's a waste of fucking time, because basically you'll just make it up and get the result you want. Why not just put the 4 out now that you think? So in the end, and we were like starving because it's like past lunchtime and all the rest of it, they put this 4 out. I'm in the launch. I think it had Beattie. I think the 4 was Redgrave, Holmes, Budget, and Beattie. And Spracklen had me in the launch, which was quite a little clever move, really. And, they were doing fartlek, and it was like, oh, this is quite a good 4. And he was going like, what do you think this 4 could do, Martin? So it was like, oh, yeah. And I kind of was a bit suspicious that Steve was there in the stroke seat because I knew he wanted to single. So then, anyway, what happened was there was this 4, which John Beattie was in, so not Tom. So I think Tom went into the 4s group. And we were going to race at Mannheim in Germany. And they had 2 separate regattas, Saturday and Sunday. Mm-hmm. And so we were entered, and we were racing the West Germans, who I think had won the silver the year before. And I was at stroke, and basically the West led us off the start. And the thing about Andy was he'd always been seen as someone that like smashed it off the start, and then he kind of didn't have anything left at the finish. So essentially it was completely opposite. So we basically rode through the West in the last part of the race. And, we won by about half a length, 3/4 of a length. It's like, we've beaten the silver medalists. So we were like back in, because we used to stay in barracks in Mannheim. And we were like playing cards in that afternoon in the barracks. And it was like, Redgrave he was in the single. He come third behind Colby and Carpena, which was a decent result, to be fair to Steve. But it's like, we don't want him in this 4. We're good enough now. So we don't want Redgrave in the 4. But the plan was that Beattie was going to drop out and Steve was going to come in at stroke. I was going to move to bow. So that afternoon, later on towards the evening, we had a paddle in the 4. So Redders came in and I was in the bow seat. And I remember doing a start. And obviously when someone like Stephen knows all that, so it's like, like, I'm going to show you. So I remember doing a 20-stroke start, and I'm just desperately hanging on in the bow seat and thinking, fucking hell, what's this? Like, we had so much speed. And then we raced, and then we were racing the West Germans again. And, you know, like 500 metres, they were like 2 lengths behind us. It was like, oh my God, you know, the whole thing was different. This guy is amazing in the stroke seat. And that was the end of it. That was, and it was like, well, obviously the level of this 4 with Redders in compared to where Steve is in the single, it's just so much higher. If he can do that to the West Germans, you know, what might you do to the rest of the world? So then it got selected. So we called ourselves, in fact, we rode at Henley that year in T-shirts, the Unlikely Lads.
Yeah.
Because it was very unlikely that we came together.
I like that.
In that way.
I like that. A little unifying factor there.
Yeah.
And so 83, did you row in that crew that year? Or was that
83? So it was, I think it was budget stroke, me at 3, and I'm not a grade 3 man. Ian McNuff at 2, John Beattie at bow, Cox by Woody, Alan Sherman. And yeah, I mean, essentially all the people around, Andy Holmes was in the 8 that was going nowhere. But, you know, all the people were around. Redders was in the single in Duisburg, and Redders didn't make the last 12 or something. He was like out the back. He spent most of that championships on the bloody water ski tow at Duisburg.
So how long before Los Angeles was that final lineup put together then?
So I guess Mannheim would have been, I'm thinking, end of April, early May.
Okay, yeah.
So
and then how many times did you race before the Olympics?
quite a lot, actually.
You did have a lot of races.
So we raced at, so that was the Mannheim thing. So now we're like, oh, this is a 4. And then we're racing in Essen, the next regatta. And I remember we were rowing in a sort of Janusek, and we'd ordered an M-Packer. And it was like, we went to Essen, and the M-Packer was on the trailer at Essen, and it was like, oh, should we just race the M-Packer here? Just rig it up and race it. So we did, and I don't think we had any real strong opposition. But because basically, I think, you know, to tell you how, you know, dominant we were, like Budge caught a crab, smashed the backstay, we snapped, and, you know, and we still won the race reasonably. So we then raced in Essen, and then the thing was, because again, it was another boycott year. So tit for tat. So the Soviets were like, well, you screwed up our games in Moscow, so we're going to fuck around with yours in Los Angeles. So there was question as to what might happen. So we needed to go and race Eastern Bloc crews. So we went into their layer, so to speak, through, you know, so you basically had to go, you got the plane to Berlin, you got the S-Bahn to Checkpoint Charlie, you got out of Checkpoint Charlie, which is the whole thing, like you're going now into Iron Curtain. And, you know, we were met on the other side. The difference between West and East was amazing. And we were racing in Grunau on the 1936 Olympic course, boys in the boat and all that. And there we had a VEB boat, so we had their boat, and they have a particular type of pitch. So I remember we couldn't change pitches, so we were like Andy's blade in particular, loads and loads of tape. We had East German blades, so it wasn't our equipment. The lake in East Germany, it was like so rough, unbelievably rough. And it was incongruous, really. So, you know, in the middle of the course, you know, our warm-up, Adrian Ellison, who was coxswain, basically said, hold it up. It's like, oh, what? And you looked in the water, and there's this bloody deer with these huge antlers just swimming in front of us in the middle of, it's a river, isn't it, the Spray. And then we go in to say, well, where are we going to empty the boat out? Because we got, like, you know, loads of water in the boat for the warm-up. And so we go into this beach, and it's a fucking nudist camp. looking at us like emptying the boat out. So in that race in Grunau, we came second. We beat the Russian four, and we were overlap on the East Germans with Harold Jarley, God rest his soul, stroking that boat, I think. So we raced then, and then by then it was apparent of the boycott. So we then went to Lucerne. So, we'd done Mannheim, Essen, Grunau. So we raced quite a lot. And then the fourth regatta was Lucerne. And I'd never won at Lucerne. I got bronze or silver medals. But it was, I think winning at Lucerne Regatta is a thing outside the World Championship.
Still now, yeah.
And on the Saturday, so I remember Steve saying, what time do you think we'll do? So I'm like, I don't know, like maybe 6:12, 6:11 or whatever it was. And we raced in the final. It was a nice tail breeze. And we were racing the East Germans. There was an American squad crew with Mike Tatey in, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the coach of the American 8 that won in Athens in 2004. And basically, we went off the start and we were okay in the field. And then we started edging out. And then, we got to 1,000 and we were like edging out more. And it was like we had clear water on the east. And like the last 500, it's like, oh, fuck, this is what it feels like to win in Lucerne. It's like amazing. And we came in, we did like, I think, something like 6:07, which then was a world record.
Yeah.
And then what was it, so that was like, okay. And I think then only the winners got out the boat at Lucerne. Mm-hmm. Like, and same at World Championships, you never had this podium stuff. It was, unless it was the Olympics. So we won, and then so what we'd beaten the East Germans. We knew we were going to Los Angeles, yeah. And then, so what are we going to do on the Sunday? So there was this big debate. It wasn't argumentative. It was basically, and I think Spracklen, I definitely thought, right, we shouldn't race the Sunday. Made our statement. That's it. So we never raced on Sunday. And the East, basically, it was a quicker day. The tailwind was stronger. The East basically broke our world record. Day one, they did 6:5. And I remember like going up to Harold Jarlin and saying, "You look really sorry about the Olympics and stuff like that," when they were de-rigging their boat. But we were we were sat up at the Lido at the start.
Yeah.
Going swimming and just watching the start of races. So that was our race program before Los Angeles.
So, Emily, having spoken about it, obviously you said in the past you felt like these crews were unbeatable. What was it that changed that for you? Was it just like, obviously having Steve going a bit faster, beating that Russian crew first? Like, what was the sense of what gave you this belief that it was possible? Did it just slowly come from the results, or?
So, I think that's a great question. So what I believe is, certainly Spracklen as a coach wasn't weighed down with, these crews are better and should win. Like, I think he worked with Chris Bailey and Mike Hart in the double scull, and, they'd actually gone up against the Norwegians, who were the then best, but beaten these Germans and Russians. And they won the world title in 1977. So I think his mentality. I think Stephen was like, didn't have any hang-ups about beating East Germans and, like, I'm here and they're there. I think Budge was very sort of kind of quite open-minded in that way. I don't think he necessarily thought that they were better. Andy Holmes was like, fuck them, I'll take them. This was a bloke who was like, while he was training, he would like work as a hoddy, a brick carrier, with a double-sized hod so he could earn more money running upstairs. And this was in between two training sessions. And he'd cycle to training. So they weren't overawed. So I think psychologically, I think the approach was different. I think you had an exceptional athlete in Steve Redgrave, who, is a generational rower. And Britain was fortunate in that, you had generational rowers like with Steve and then with Matt Pinn that came along. But with Andy, you had this fierce competitor. So the stars were aligned in that way. Budget was, just hugely reliable, very, very tough as a rower. And I was just like, the one that could sort of smack it along in the bow seat. I think psychologically, so they had no issues about going for Olympic gold. And I do say this quite often, that I didn't think I was good enough to be an Olympic champion. Like, I had this kind of hang-up. I call it a hang-up now, because I watched people, say like names like Seb Coe or Steve Ovett, who were like middle distance runners, Steve Cram or whatever, Alberto Wantarina, I mentioned, these people were Daley Thompson, the decathlete. They were Olympic champions. Me, I was like, I'm very happy being a bronze medalist. So I never aspired to win Olympic gold in the way that I believe like Steve did.
Sure.
Andy, Budge, Mike Spracklen. So I kind of rationalised it like my aim, but obviously we were like favourites to win Olympic gold. So my aim was like, right, don't lose. It was to go to the Olympics, it was to be part of the Olympic team, it was to get in the best boat I could. All those things, but I knew we had this gold medal thing hanging around us because we were obviously fast, but I never made a thing about wanting to be Olympic champion. That was my thing, right, that's my next step. I'm going to make Olympic champion now. It was like, I'm in this boat and it's got to work. And working was winning.
Well, Steve wouldn't accept anything else, would he?
No.
And it's interesting what you say about that. Again, it's something I found interesting about, because my own rowing career didn't quite get as far as I wanted to go. Injury and all the rest of it happened. But I sort of understand that sense of, these guys, they're gods. They're Steve, Matt, James, Cracknell. These guys are just superhuman. And I never could see myself that way. So the closer I got, I didn't ever feel like I was part of that. And even though I spent some time in the senior team as well, I still felt like there was this separation and I wasn't quite what they could be. And I think a lot of people go through that, like you said, like if you're, I never ever worried about the critique of anyone else because no one was ever going to be as mean as I was on myself. Like the self-criticalness of it is just part of the territory. But did you sort of, was there ever a point, like you said, when you went with the juniors in that quad, you sort of felt like I'm the guy. So was there a point, post Olympics, obviously we know the outcome of 84, we'll talk about it, but like, did you allow yourself to feel like you earned it, or do you just still struggle with that kind of feeling?
The thing was, there was a whole thing with me that year. I was in a relationship with a girl, Amanda Brennan, and for about 5 years. And one of the rowers in the team, Anne Calloway, and I kind of got together. I kind of felt really guilty about that, although, Anne and I used to get on really well. So that was a thing that was sort of hanging over me. And yeah, winning the gold medal was like, okay, I got this gold medal, but it was kind of like, I know it's very special, but it seems like more special than me. It's ludicrous what you project on the project.
Sure.
That's what you do. So one way I have explained it to myself in the past is I kind of say, right, so there were Olympians who like gold medal Olympians, Olympic champions who like, inverted commas, deserve it, and then there's me who done all right to get one, but which is just a load of boring, because in terms of we were doing 3 sessions a day. I was doing it like training at school, and that year, I was killing myself, and yeah, of course, I'm an Olympic champion, and rightly so, and it was Olympic efforts that got me into that, but psychologically, I sort of differentiated, and I was kind of like a real dickhead when I got back. You know, I was like, didn't talk to a lot of people. I turned down things. Remember, there was this show called Superheroes or something on the TV, and
they pit all the different athletes against each other.
You know, I said no, I didn't want to get involved in that. Jim Clark said to me, like at the Walton Head or something, he said, "Why are you behaving like a dickhead? You know, you need to," because he'd got Olympic silver and they were really pissed off that they didn't win gold. He says, "You're Olympic champion, you got a fucking gold medal, you know, start acting like it."
Yeah.
So I think it took me quite a long time with therapy and stuff for me to be comfortable with the notion that I was an Olympic champion and deserved to be so, and comfortable with it.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think, again, we've talked before about, you know, I sort of have this sense of, I wasn't, you know, I think when you get to the top, you rank yourself a lot. Everyone's really, he's a bit better than me, but I'm a bit better than him. And there's always this kind of real, like, everyone has this sense of like who they're better or worse than. And I sort of feel like I sense come away from my career and be like, I didn't quite get what I wanted. And then I'll sit across the table from John Collins, who's been to 2 Olympics, but we'll sit there and say, but I didn't get any medals. And then you'll sit across from someone who got bronze, like, but I didn't get gold. Or you'll speak to an Olympic champion and be like, but I didn't get 2 or 3, or I could. And you're like, this is not personal to me. This is something that obviously every athlete goes through. And you can, you know, not just in rowing, like, you'll always find someone who's done better. Yeah. You'll always find someone who's done worse.
And Steve, like Kath Bishop is onto this with her book, The Long Wing, which is about, you know, having fun and enjoy the sport. So I love the sport and love being part of the sport. And within that, you have got these targets about aspirational targets of results that you get. So how you play those two off against each other is like fascinating. So, you know, I love being part of rowing and thoroughly enjoyed it, but it does come with, you know, pressure. And, you know, but I was 27 when I won the Olympics, and, you know, that's so young.
Yeah.
It really is, in terms of what you know about how to deal with things.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have the notion of putting people on pedestals. So, you know, Steve is an ordinary guy. Matt Pinsent's an ordinary guy, but we kind of mythologise them. You know, and I've been guilty as that as anyone. But, you know, they can fuck up like the rest of us. You know, he talked to Matt about when he was president of Oxford in the boat race.
Yeah.
You know, they got completely done. Stephen, you know, in Tasmania they got a bronze medal behind the Jürgen Kellner and the Pimenovs. Or when he was in the single scull. Everyone's fallible in that way.
I think that's an interesting point that feeds into your sense of like, how do you get past the feeling of someone is unbeatable? Well, you've got to understand that they're all humans. One of the Jürgenisms he said a couple of times was that they're all men, they all boil in water, which I didn't quite understand, but I got the sense of it. There's nothing different about
you know,
it.
The thing is, I don't know like the criteria behind a decision, but you take the Sinkovich brothers, who, you know, were going for the double for Paris, and, you know, they got beat by Tweller and Bruyning in the 2023 World Championships. And they said, right, we're now going in the pair.
Yeah.
Presumably because they think the Netherlands double is too quick. They look to their times. They might think they get more out of themselves in the pair, but they've made a decision, in one sense, to make them, inverted commas, unbeatable. And these are 2 guys who are double Olympic champions in a double and a pair. I mean, for fuck's sake, what are they doing?
Yeah.
So, you know, mind games.
And like you said, it's always like way easier to pedestalize someone else, but you'll never meet a bigger critic of yourself than yourself.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's so fascinating to like hear different ways in which like people find a different way to like put themselves down or say like, oh, I'm not as good as the achievement that I've literally just achieved. Like, where's that come from? So let's talk about the race itself. It was an early start for LA, wasn't it?
So that was one thing which helped make the whole thing special, because and Spracklen was very good at that. So we kind of knew the race time, which was 8 o'clock. We knew we were staying in Santa Barbara, which was an hour's drive to the course. We knew we wanted to do pre-race paddle. So basically that was like, right, you need to get up at 3:30 a.m. and you need to do that every morning on training camp. So we essentially, as soon as we got to San Diego, which was like magic place for a training camp, Point Loma College, every morning we got up at 3:30. So that was different to like everyone else. So we were already kind of special in that sense. So we followed that routine. We were racing this new American crew because Mike Tate's crew got beaten on the trials race, like the squad crew run by Chris Kozanowski got beaten by this new American crew, and we were racing them in the heat. It's funny how memory goes, because I kind of have a different memory to the heat to what actually happened. Like I said to Adrian, we led them off the start, and he said, no, they came through us and led us. And I'm like, no, not. And he said, well, look at the video. Like, oh, shit. We led them off the start. They came back through us. The race was notable. We were buzzed, like literally, I don't know, they seemed like to be about 50 feet above the water, but these two US Navy jets.
Oh, wow.
It was just like 1,000 meters, this noise. And and anyway, so we beat the Americans. We rode through them and we beat them, I'm not going to say by how much, because obviously, like memory, I've got a much better memory about the final than the heat. So essentially, we were like sitting around in the Olympic Village in Santa Barbara for like a week. So we qualified straight for the final, and it was kind of like Steve Redgrave got Tino Sono, because we were playing these sort of games, electric games, and then you had to press a button to make them work, and he did his finger in buttons so much. There wasn't so much you could do, but the pressure was kind of building up. And I remember Andy saying, you're going to get no sleep the night before the final, but you're going to be on it the next day. And I didn't. I think Budge slept. I was sharing with him. I don't think I slept, but maybe I might have done. And then, not much communication. You go down in the car. I remember, the songs we'd listened to, they both came on the radio when we're driving out the Olympic Village at 3:30 in our own car. Cyndi Lauper, Time After Time, which is funny when you listen to Budge, you can't singing along to it. And Madonna, Borderline.
Oh, good stuff.
So they were like on FM radio that we had the car tuned to. And then we get down to the course, and we're down all week, and there's like, you walk there and there's like nothing except for, you can hardly see in front of your arm. It's like, oh shit. So you can't row.
Yeah.
They're not going to, lay on the water, and it's like, oh bloody hell. So we kind of, we hadn't really spent any time in these little tents that you were supposed to change in, and the question was, well, what are they going to do? Because the next day canoeing's supposed to have the regatta.
You have to change the lane sizing and everything.
So it was like, and then the reason it was early in the morning was because the sea breeze made the course pretty rough.
Mm-hmm.
So they made a very late decision that the race could go ahead at the right time. So we kind of went out, and the warm-up was good. Adrian calls like first burst 28 and it's like 34. You think, oh right, yeah, everyone means business here.
Yeah.
And everything's above on the ray, and the boat felt like it was moving all right. And there was fog on the course, wisps of fog. And then I remember sitting on the start for quite a while. I remember crossing myself because I'm sort of Catholic, and thought, right, this is a thing. And the night before, Mike Spracklen had kind of said, right, this is your race plan. So we'd race the Americans. So it was us or the Americans, basically. And somebody else was fighting for bronze. So he kind of said, right, so what you're going to do is you're going to fast start, lead the Americans, you're going to get to 250, and then you're going to really put your foot down. And then you're just going to edge out, and then you're going to get to 500 and move out. So we're going to be in the lead by 1,000, and then we're going to move away a second. So it was like, and I remember in that sort of chat saying, oh, we could just, row next to them, like, because we're, nobody beats, everything we've done at the finish it was like sensational. We'd be doing training pieces against the women's 8, against the British Cox's 4, and the whole thing, our finish was like phenomenal. You just knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, and then we could use our finish. It was like, no, this is the plan. So we start off, and I don't, some of my memory is from looking at the race again, but I remember being in the race and being at about 250 and thinking we're not in the lead, and then going through, and Adrian's giving the calls, Ellison, and we go through 250, and then we have a kind of minute call coming up to 500, and basically it's apparent the Americans, because we're in 4, I think they're in 2, and the Americans are moving away,
mm-hmm.
and they're going out to half a length. So it's basically like, well, this isn't the race plan.
Mm.
So my memory is, I said to Adrian, I'm making the calls now. So the race plan we got is like,
Gone.
So, so I was like quite happy to do that. So, and the others have different memories, funnily enough, but I remember, okay, we're going to go back, we're going to move on the Americans now. Nothing happened. And I think if you look at the Americans, they are rowing beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
They've, funny enough, they had this special coating on their boat, like, the America's Cup yacht had this sort of, which was
hydrophobic.
Yeah. But they're rowing beautifully, they're really long, they're really smooth. We're kind of doing our smack it in thing. And then, so, get to the first 1,000, they're still like good half a length, a little bit more up. And, we're kind of in there. And the expectation is, okay, I called a thing and we'd move, but we weren't. So then you get into the third quarter and it was like, okay, calls again, not moving. And then I think I made a call coming into the last 500 metres. And then you could think, right, and I think Budge remembers this, like, of me making a call. And, you could hear the desperation in his voice sort of thing. And then we started to move. So we were already moving back a little bit, with 500 to go. But, the thing was still in doubt. And then people remember watching it. I can't remember actually while racing, but there was like fog banks that we were running through. Some fog banks still remain. So it was like the British 4 running through the mist. And the thing was, it was all so familiar because on every training piece we'd done and all the races, we had just absolutely picked our boat speed up. And what, you might say, well, okay, so Steve just got a shift on. He decided, Steve's fantastic at rowing, doing what he needs to do to win.
Mm-hmm.
And, but to be fair, I think Steve was putting everything in. I think he was sick after the race. And so then basically we were edging back on the Americans. I think it made great telly. Steve Gladstone, funnily enough, was the American, the
Yale coach,
coached the American 8. Like, he was the summariser on American TV, watching the race, and it made great telly because you could see the bows going like this. And then, I don't know, with about 250, 200 metres to go, our bow edged in front, but they were still there. And so Adrian was taking on the calls in the last 500 metres. I don't think I was riding that well in the race. I mean, we had this thing that Spracklen was like, you've got to get your legs down quickly, which was, so I think in the heat particularly, I was like very like bum shoving almost. Like I wasn't quite locked on my legs, you know, like Budge and Andy. I think Mike told us to do that, and then he wasn't out with us because he couldn't coach us on the lake. There were no launches. I was doing it a bit less in the final, but, you know, still, you know, that was always my thing. You know, they took all the cross factor in terms of coming back at the finish. So it fitted into my profile of races.
Sure.
I like that sort of profile. I'm good at it. So, yeah, we got through, and then past the line, absolutely nothing. Felt nothing. Just a blank. There's a picture with Andy with his arm in the air, Budge with his fist like this. Steve's just collapsed over his blade. He's got nothing left. And then it was quite odd because you're out in the middle of the lake still, you know. And then the guy I'd rode with in the pair, John Beattie, he was watching the race. My family was out there as well. And John was running round the edge of the lake towards where we were, you know, just drifting in. And he was shouting, "Martin, Martin." And that call just woke me up and said, "Oh, fucking hell, you know, we've won." And I think, you know, the emotion, if there was anything, and I think it was nothing, would have been relief. You know, this notion, it's like away from motivation. The fear was of not, you know, being favourites and not winning. So when you're in a behind position, you know, that's what you're afraid of. You're strongly motivated to move away from that. So, you know, the motivation was really quite high. Medal ceremony was just like amazing. You know, been on the podium at Lucerne, but nothing like this. I can remember, you know, the whole bronze medal thing in Moscow. But, you know, I think there was a crowd of 34,000 or something like that. There was a lot of people there, including my mum and dad. You know, I went to say hi to my mum and dad just before the medal ceremony. And then, yeah, it was kind of like, oh, what? So and then you go through your head. So my head was like all the things I'd watched on telly. I remember thinking of David Wilkie, who was a British swimmer who won the 200-metre breaststroke in the 76 Olympics. I remember watching his medal ceremony. And that thought went back through my mind, oh, what do you know? And so, like, what do you do on this thing? No singing the national anthem. I'm not much of a singing the national anthem kind of person. In fact, none of us sung the national anthem, I don't think. So we just looked at the flag, and it was kind of like, and going down the boat, I was like a bit numb. But, you know, I need to treat this as a serious moment, and, you know...
must be completely surreal, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's... we knew it was the first British crew to win Olympic gold medal since, you know, the guys downstairs that had won, you know, in 1948.
Yeah, 36 years.
Yeah, and so we knew it was a big deal. I think Budge was like, you know, bottom lip going.
Yeah.
Andy was like, you know, crying, his eyes went to his head, and Steve was quivery, because, you know, that's what he wanted, Olympic gold. And then Adrian, the camera went down to Adrian, massive smile on his face. Obviously, he's, you know, and then it was like there wasn't too much media. You know, the whole thing was there wasn't much going on. You know, in terms of things like now athletes get, rightly so, if they win, they get an MBE or something like that. There's some financial reward, you know, people ask them to speak and stuff like that. Like basically, we kind of got back. We had, I think, the only thing that we got was 250 quid each for going to British Leyland, the motor show.
Yeah.
Something to do with the van. That was it. And then we all kind of sat around. We were all together. We weren't together on a lot of occasions, but we went to Andy's house on New Year's Eve, and we thought, oh, right, you know, well, if we don't get MBEs, then Spracklen will, because he coached Balliol and Hart to a silver medal in Montreal. And then nothing. It was like, what? You know, like hockey's coach, and I think hockey, they got the bronze medal, a guy called Roger Self, and that had made an impact back in the UK, which we had no idea about. It was like, you know, I think even hockey might have won Team of the Year at the BBC Sports Personality
Oh, come
Show.
on.
Yeah.
Come on.
And it was kind of like nothing. And it was really interesting because, you know, like what comes with it is expectations, life-changing. And it's like, oh, it's not. So obviously the value to it is, you know, the value you create for yourself. So you understand that latterly, but there was a lot of, you know, resentment, I think, you know, what hadn't happened. You know, to be fair, British Rowing did a nice little booklet with the sponsors, NatWest, that Chris Dodd wrote. There was a blade presentation, which, you know, I've got the blade up in my kitchen now, that Princess Anne did the next year at the National Championships in Nottingham. The one thing which latterly I did want to go, so I phoned up Question of Sport and said, you know, I'd like to go on. They said, well, normally we are, you know, who are you, sort of thing. You know, what Martin Cross, what have you done? I was in that 4 that won. Oh, right, okay. So I got to go on Question of Sport. That was like, you know, the thing. But, you know, if you're doing it for external reward, it's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of don't realise that when you're just 27.
Yeah.
You think those things are important and matter.
Yeah. Talking, you said briefly about money. Did you pay to go to 84, or was that paid for you?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So there was this incredibly amazing group of people called the Sports Aid Foundation.
Yeah.
And they funded us really, I think, from 78, maybe a little bit 77, I'm not sure. And they would have been giving us money to go to the Olympics. We generally had to pay some, you know, I think, you know, then we get about $4,000 from Sports Aid Foundation. Some of that will go to British Rowing. That's how it was. NatWest sponsored us a bit. So, you know, I think our boat in Bled was called NatWest Bank. It obviously couldn't have any name in the Moscow Olympics or in the Los Angeles Olympics. And NatWest sponsored this pamphlet, but I don't think, you know, there was anything beyond, you know, beyond that sort of funding.
Yeah, you weren't making any money to go, but it was maybe slightly more affordable to get yourself there,
Yes.
which is crazy. I think because lottery, it's still in 92, wasn't quite in place.
Oh, no, lottery was post-Atlanta.
Oh, after Atlanta was, I thought.
Yeah, in fact, oddly enough, so I was, because I used to do lots of things, so I got involved in athlete groups in World Rowing, but also, I think, initially on the British Olympic Association. And we formed this athlete group with people like Adrian Morehouse, who was, you know, gold medalist in, was he in Seoul in the 200 metres breaststroke? People like Seb Coe's wife, their wife was on it. Bryn Vale, the gold medalist in Seoul in sailing. Dominic Marnie, bronze medalist in pentathlon. Gavin Stewart, another rower, was on it. And we basically made this athlete report in 1992. We did a survey with all the athletes. Like, what do you think should happen in sport? And I'm really, really proud of this and what we did. And the BOA funded it, and you know, and essentially what it laid out was, and we looked at other systems, and this is how the British system should run. And almost everything in that, with, I think, I'm not sure, do they get paid for medals now? If they win medals, I think they do. So yeah, BOA paying you for medals that you win, government with lottery funding paying, you know, and nationally funded sports centres, all of that. So all the recommendations of that 1992 BOA athlete report got passed in. But it kind of took the shock of 96, and like, we've only got one gold medal.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it for it to really get implemented in full?
Yeah, well, like, that's always the way, isn't it? It's difficult to change things when you're winning. Like you said, that point post 81 when everything fall apart. That was the sense of let's have some change. 96, these things happened. Hopefully, Tokyo being disappointing in some ways, being the catalyst to fire people up. Fingers crossed for this year to come. But so you must have, even though like you said, you had that sense for a long time of maybe not feeling like you were as big as the medal you got. Hopefully, you sort of realised that you clearly been involved in starting what was then a medal run that still goes.
Yeah, I think take a huge degree of satisfaction, and it's like a privilege to be in that position of being part of something, a run that carries on. And I think the pleasure to people around you, like mum and dad, sisters who were out there, it is phenomenal. I mean, the medal lived at my mum and dad's house, basically.
For protection?
No, and they never used to. They used to have the door open all the time, but Dad just wanted it to show people.
Yeah, my parents kept hold of my Henley medal for a while, but that's because I was living in all sorts of shared houses, and I think they didn't trust that it was going to go missing.
Yeah.
Funny enough, now, I think the gold medal is sort of, and you project this on it, it's a because my dad passed away in 2004. It's kind of a representation of him more than anything else. And it means more to me through that than anything else.
Yeah, it's what it represents. Yeah. It's not like when Alex Partridge lost his medal. At the end of the day, it doesn't mean you haven't won.
Yeah,
it's just a medal. But yeah,
I don't know how lightweight rowing is going to be at World Championships now. There is this huge pressure from the IOC. You are like off your head if you're thinking this 2,000 metre sport, no changes. We've got this sport going on, this sport. Kids here, their attention spans 3 seconds. Like, what are you doing? I'm not sure how sustainable the sport is. I see that the sport has to show the International Olympic Committee that it is doing evolution. So I think there will be more changes. I think World Rowing is paranoid about making this Olympics at 1500 an exception, because they've got a definition of rowing which includes it as an endurance sport. That's what makes it the sport it is. They've kind of said, well, 1500 on this one occasion, we'll show the IOC we're being flexible. But I think when you make a change, the danger is that actually once you've done it once, then other things can change. That element of the sport that's 2K, I think, won't change. I think the makeup of teams will change.